Hey everyone, I'm just here to talk a little bit about ADHD and brain spotting. So, I got diagnosed with ADHD in my 40s, and that was through the process of getting my kids assessed, which is a really common thing for parents of kind of my age and older to discover that they themselves were neurodivergent when their children are assessed. And then all of a sudden, all these things start dropping in and making sense. And the curiosity is spurred on, and then one thing leads to another, and then voila, you have, the condition that finally makes a lot more sense than it ever did. So it's a really interesting thing because I'm still relatively early in my process of integrating that into my sense of self, my practice. And in that space of integration, it's prompted me to look really quite critically at some of the therapies which I've had in the past, and also spurred on a lot more curiosity around the use of brain spotting and how that can help with ADHD. So I've always been more drawn to more dynamic, experiential therapies. They always made more sense to me. I did a lot of psychodynamic therapy in the past, and I did a lot of, CBT and things like that. And they were helpful in their own ways, but I always found that they were just incredibly demanding, and I couldn't keep track of them. I just felt like I was always kind of wandering everywhere, and I wasn't ever kind of grounded in that. And therefore, I wasn't able to put a lot of those practices and methods into best practice. And so I really leaned into a lot of experiential methods, and that led me to brain spotting. So I guess where I'm comfortable in my awareness and my ability to process thoughts, emotions, and whatnot, it is really from a more somatic place. And this isn't unique to me. This is a really common thing with ADHD individuals. A lot of people, speak about how helpful it is to be able to work in the body and how stabilizing that is and how expansive that is. Because we're not having to engage all of that executive function and prefrontal cortex in order to kind of be successful in our therapeutic interventions. So with brain spotting, we're working with the body, we're working with emotion, we're working with experience, and we're working with memory. We're also working beyond that in some ways as well. And I did a lot of brain spotting before I got my diagnosis. And primarily what I was working on in that stage was really trauma processing. And I'd done quite a bit of trauma processing before, but brain spotting was able to process on such a deep level that I didn't really have access to before. And so that stabilized my nervous system in a way that was really surprising and really welcomed. It was fantastic. And yet afterwards, there was still all of these lingering issues which would come up. There was still this dysregulation in certain places. There was still, disorganization. There was still lots of attentional issues. There was still a lot of kind of, behaviors which I was like, well, I don't understand this. This is really bizarre. Like I've done a lot of trauma processing. I've done a lot of therapy, but why am I always coming up against these reoccurring issues? Fast forward, I got diagnosed. A lot of that just makes sense now. And so it's made me think a little bit more critically around, well, how do you help people with ADHD in a therapeutic way? And so what I tend to do, because I work with quite a few ADHD individuals and also autistic individuals as well, and I find brain spotting is incredibly helpful for them, but there isn't really the one way to do it for everybody. Everybody's very unique and has their own needs and preferences. And so when I am working with someone with ADHD in brain spotting, a lot of the time we're working on helping kind of manage and clear that stress of day-to-day life, helping to process, clear, and restore that balance in the nervous system in terms of like the trauma history. And that's a really significant kind of part, I think, of the ADHD healing experience is knowing that ADHD on its own is really, really hard to live with, but it's infinitely harder to live with ADHD when there's also co-occurring issues at play. Like if there is a lot of unprocessed trauma that's putting a lot of stress, that's taking up a lot of space, that's creating a lot of noise and a lot of distraction in its own way. So when you're able to work with the trauma, you kind of bring down that pressure, you bring down that load on the nervous system, you bring down that load on the brain. Working with things around sleep is really helpful as well. So brain spotting can be really helpful in working through some of those blocks and helping change some of the behaviors around sleep as well, which are, oftentimes linked to certain traumas in the past as well. So when we're able to kind of work in that way, we're really kind of indirectly supporting the ADHD individual, the ADHD experience, and the ADHD wiring, kind of just reducing the weight, the burden of all of the other things that get piled on when you have ADHD. So partly why that's effective is because we're working with a lot of mindfulness, we're working with a lot of somatic processing, and we're also working with a lot of insight. There's a beautiful aspect to brain spotting which happens in the processing. There's also a huge amount of awareness which is being built. There's a huge amount of connection which is being built, and there's a huge amount of certainty in oneself that comes out of that. And that can be really, really helpful for people with ADHD who can often feel very listless, and there's a lot of issues with identity, and there's a lot of issues with masking. So when you do live a life for a long time masking all the time, you really, miss out on a lot of self-understanding because a lot of things become, very distorted. So brain spotting can be really helpful in working through some of those identity issues and some of that fear that comes up around, trusting self and knowing self and knowing what's best and knowing how to manage things when they happen. So it's a really good scaffolding. It's a really, really helpful scaffolding to have brain spotting as part of an ADHD treatment. In terms of executive functioning, though, because this is what I ask, like, will brain spotting, increase my executive functioning skills? Will it help me, become organized? Will it help me stay on track? Will it help me be consistent? And this is a tricky question because there are a lot of things, there's a lot of, cofactors which affect executive function. I'd say for a lot of ADHD people that our executive function is kind of intrinsically relatively fixed, that it doesn't really shift and change too much across a lifetime. So we're not looking to automatically, oh, great, I've got really great short-term memory. Oh, I've got really great, attentional skills. Or, oh, I've got really good organizational skills. All of a sudden that's unrealistic, and that's not really how that works. But when you're able to target and focus and support the other aspects, because there are a lot of things which contribute to either better or poorer executive functioning. Sleep, diet, exercise, drug and alcohol use, relationship difficulties, daily stress, financial stress, all of these things, all of these added on pressures will have an impact on your ability to, think clearly, act, perform, organize, succeed essentially. And so again, we're bringing it into the view that when we're working with brain spotting with ADHD, we're working with the things which are contributing to it, which are making it harder to deal with, and kind of helping them kind of, be stripped away and managed. And then you can focus on some of those other things which are more, I'd say, more directly related to the skills around managing ADHD, which are things more related to the executive functioning. So, how to schedule properly, how to use, timers, how to use, external supports, how to bring in appropriate accommodations, how to understand your energy and how that fluctuates. And so ADHD is much easier to deal with when you're not having to deal with everything else at the same time. So brain spotting, you can see it as a way that we can kind of help tighten that experience and bring it into a more, not just manageable experience, but in essence, a more clear experience. Because ADHD feels very different when there's a lot of unprocessed trauma, you know? Whereas ADHD, after the trauma burden has been helped and cleared, it becomes a little bit more realistic. Like, oh, wait a minute, I can do that. My limits, my capabilities are shifting a bit. So brain spotting is a really supportive way of kind of helping people guide through that process. In terms of, is it evidence-based? No, it's not. Unfortunately, brain spotting really doesn't have a lot of evidence-based research. Hopefully that will change in the future. Hopefully it will. But at this stage, it doesn't. So it's kind of a lot of it is quite anecdotal. A lot of it is personal, like all therapies. Some things work for some people, some things work for other people's. In my practice, when I'm working with people with ADHD, not everybody with ADHD is looking to, work on those traditional like ADHD coaching kind of methods. They're not looking to, I want to learn how to structure my time. I want to learn how to do this. A lot of the time, the ADHD people that I'm working with are coming to work on trauma. They're coming to work on relationship difficulties. They're coming to work on, patterns. They're coming to work on just feeling really stuck and really, unmotivated. Coming to work on the depression. They're coming to work on their anxiety. And then alongside that, where appropriate and where needed, I might interweave some of those other necessary skills. So I often do like a combination of the brain spotting and also with the coaching. So helping people structure better, helping people organize better, helping people understand their goals a little bit better, helping them understand the process of the goal, and then supporting that and scaffolding that, but also it comes into another space, which is body doubling. It comes into that space of accountability, and it comes into that space of, clear and supportive, non-judgmental connection, which is really, really vital for people with ADHD. Having someone that they can work alongside with that can be there and support them as they move through the things that they want to accomplish. In terms of the limitations with brain spotting and ADHD, it's not a silver bullet like everything. Like medication's not a silver bullet with ADHD. These are all things which contribute to a certain level. And so it's good to have clear expectations around what this is and what this does. So there's a lot of people who believe that brain spotting and other kind of brain-based therapies have this kind of very like biological or structural effect on the brain. That when you do brain spotting, your brain is like physically changing. And if that is happening, it's happening on a very, very subtle level in more of a space of neuroplasticity, but it's not really changing the mechanics. So it's clear to understand that the ADHD is a lifelong condition and it's about managing it. But part of managing it is knowing, well, what is it that I'm managing? Because managing anxiety is different from managing ADHD. And so it's helpful to kind of bring that awareness and bring those things into a better kind of understanding. Other areas where brain spotting might be limiting for ADHD, or at least challenging for people with ADHD, is the potential for overwhelm or confusion in the processing. So, ADHD, we like going on tangents. We like to kind of chase things. We like to get, into things and, hyper focus and things like that. And so there is an issue that a lot of people expect to come up when they're doing brain spotting, which is how am I going to be able to focus on this? How am I going to have the attentional, ability to stay with this and process this? Honestly, a lot of people are surprised at their ability to have that. And I think that that's more of a process around learning how to, activate that sense of mindfulness. And when we're working in the body, that's a really, oftentimes a much easier place for a person with ADHD to kind of focus on. Because again, it's stimulating, it's dynamic, it's kind of engaging on that level. It's not kind of wafting into the spaces of, theory and whatnot. Um, there is a pacing issue, I would say, with ADHD, that certain ADHD individuals really appreciate a more paced and almost kind of titrated experience with brain spotting. Sometimes because the ADHD experience can just be really fast and overwhelming, it can feel like we need more time to kind of process in between, or we need more support. So yeah, that's it. I'm trying to make some generalizations, but again, like my mind's going all over the place thinking, well, that's true for some people, but it's not true for a lot of other people. And it's sort of like this. So again, it's one of those things which is like nearly everything you read about ADHD, no one can give you a clear answer. Everybody says, well, you've got to try it and see if it works. But I will say that, you know, if you're able to kind of work on the co-occurring issues, that makes ADHD much easier to kind of understand and assist and support and manage. So that's where brain spotting comes in. Okay, I hope you found that useful. And if you want any more information about that or you're interested in giving it a try, you can find me at my website. Okay, bye.